Yeah, let's not beat around the bush. The Nintendo Switch 2 is a scam. I called Apple out years ago when they set the new price trend of smartphones going from $600 to $1,000. And I feel strongly that Nintendo have done the same here. No game should cost $80. We just recently had game prices go from $60 to $70, and in record time, the games have already gone up to $80. And when a big company like Nintendo sets a price trend, others will follow. At this rate, games will cost $100 in no time, and Nintendo were the first of the scumbag corporations to definitively push us in that direction. Now, this isn't new. Nintendo have unreasonably raised game prices before. In fact, that's one of the reasons I never bought the original Switch, is because of how expensive the games were. Lego City Undercover was released on the Wii U in 2013 and it launched for $40. 4 years later, it came to the Switch for $60. Luigi's Mansion 2 for the 3DS was $40 and released in March 2013. 11 years later, in 2024, it released on the Switch for $60. Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze on the Wii U was released in 2014 and it launched at $50, and then a couple years later they discounted it to $20, and then a couple years after that, they released it on Switch for, you guessed it, $60. That's $10 more than the original release when it was brand new. This and Luigi's Mansion 2 should be in the bargain bin at this point, but Nintendo thought they should be priced as brand new games. And then we have the strange cases. Ultra Street Fighter 2 The Final Challengers, which is basically just good old retro Street Fighter 2, $40. And this was just a slightly revised version of Street Fighter 2 HD Remix on 360 and PS3, which only cost $10. The notoriously ugly and broken Mortal Kombat 1 was $70 on Nintendo Switch, the exact same price as the PS5 and Xbox versions. I mean, the fact that they were charging you at all for this game was ridiculous. Do you know how bad you have to be for IGN to give you a 3? The immediate turnoff for me was when Nintendo sold 1-2 Switch at launch, which was essentially a free pack-in game that they priced at $50. At this early stage, I could see that Nintendo were nickel and diming their customers any which way they could. And after being a proud DS and 3DS owner for 10 years, this is where I stepped back and did not buy the latest portable console from Nintendo, because it was clear to me that they had taken their customers for granted. Enter the Nintendo Switch 2. This little rascal. I think it's fair before we take out the belt that we should mention some of the good things first. The device itself looks very nice. It's a good update in physical hardware and architecture. The games have had a decent boost in graphics. Donkey Kong Bonanza looks incredible, and that's coming from someone who never really cared all that much for Donkey Kong games. The LCD screen had everyone scared at first, but it turns out to be so well made that it is actually being compared to the Switch's OLED screen. It has Game Share, which is essentially what DS Download Play used to be, which is a blast from the past, and it's also backwards compatible with the Switch 1. It's using emulation, but still, that's good to see. But then we get to the costs, and this has been the most divisive thing about the console's announcement. The Nintendo Switch 2 costs $450, and the bundle with Mario Kart World costs $500. For a Nintendo system, this is unbelievably expensive, especially when you take into account that the Switch 1 was $300 at launch. The Switch 2 is $200 more expensive, and the value gets worse when you take into account that it potentially has unresolved technical issues from the Switch 1. Now, for those of you that aren't aware, the Switch 1 was notorious for having drift issues with its analog sticks. This was a very common and serious issue, to the point that some people took it upon themselves to file a class action lawsuit against Nintendo. Now, you'd think that Nintendo would try to fix the drift issue with the Switch 2, and the best way to do that would be by using Hall Effect joysticks. But nope, Nintendo stuck to their guns and went with regular old joysticks, presumably as a cost-cutting measure. So this $500 device has the risk of malfunctioning like the previous Switch, and you'll have to fork out an additional $90 for a replacement Joy-Con when it starts drifting. Like I said, Nintendo take their customers for granted, especially when it fills their wallets. Speaking of which, then we get the games. Now, if the games were priced well, then I think people would ultimately look past the buy-in price of the system. But sadly, the games is where this system starts to feel like a scam. First off, the digital games have gone up to $80, but the physical games, they have gone up to $90. Yeah, it's like Nintendo are punishing you for wanting to buy your games physically. They say that printing the cover and making the cartridge contributes to that charge, but that's bullshit. Games have always cost the same on digital as they have on physical for years, and no one has ever made a fuss about it before, so for Nintendo to do this is just their way of training you to think twice about your physical purchase and have you go digital instead of physical. And this way they get all of your money and don't have to split it with retailers. And the cost of games are all over the place. The president of Nintendo of America, Doug Bowser, and yes, the irony of his name is not lost on me, has tried to justify the price point and said that what you see right there is variable pricing. We'll look at each game, really look at the development that's gone into the game, the breadth and depth of the gameplay if you will, the durability over time, and the repeatability of gameplay experiences. Those are all factors, and there's many more that go into consideration of what is the right price point for the game. So I think you can anticipate that there will be variable pricing, and we haven't set a benchmark. But then, why does a nearly 10-year-old Zelda game cost the same amount of money as the latest Mario Kart? Simply put, his justification for the price holds no water and no one is buying his logic, or lack thereof. But believe it or not, things get even worse for physical games, as with the Switch 2, Nintendo have also introduced game keycards, and these are particularly disgusting and manipulative. Game keycards basically mean that some of the physical games that you buy will not have the game data on them. Instead, when you open the box, there will be a code that will allow you to download a digital version of the game, and in order to play that digital game, you will need that empty cartridge in your Switch to validate your digital purchase. Hence the name, keycard. Sound needlessly complicated? That's because it is. This essentially is a devious way of Nintendo battling people who want to buy their games physically, because they are selling you a digital game, but are pretending that it's physical because, well, you need the cartridge to play it. That does not make it a physical game, but Nintendo are trying to trick you into thinking that it does. And the average Joe who walks into a store and buys their game will think that they got themselves the physical version, when in reality, this whole transaction is a digital one. That is downright manipulative and disgusting. It's misleading the customer at its finest. Now, there are some people defending this and saying, well, it doesn't apply to all games, but that doesn't matter. It shouldn't apply to any games, and developers that are utilizing it are already taking the absolute mick. How is it that a game as big as Cyberpunk will fit on the actual cartridge, but Capcom have decided that Street Fighter 6 will go on a keycard? Even worse, Bravely Default is a friggin' remastered 3DS game that is being ported over to the Switch 2. It's only 11 gigabytes, and for some reason, that is on a frickin' keycard. I mean, there is no excuse for this. Now, when Nintendo announced these, I couldn't wrap my head around it, because it seems like such a useless technology. And then it hit me. The more I thought about it, I started to recollect what Microsoft tried to pull on the Xbox One, and how they were trying to clamp down and stop people from doing used and shared games. And I think Nintendo are doing the same thing here. I think they're trying to prevent people from selling their physical games. Why else would they be doing this and having games that can clearly fit on a cartridge end up being tied behind these key cards? Now, this has not been confirmed as of yet. There might be a way to remove your digital signature off of the game so you can trade or lend it to another person, but that has not been revealed at the time of making this video. But I wouldn't be surprised if these keycards are Nintendo's way of trying to slowly transition away from physical games altogether. But regardless, if your game is tied to the Nintendo servers and not the cartridge, then you will no longer have control over the physical game that you purchased. Nintendo will. The whole point of physical games is that once you have purchased it, you have it forever. There are countless people who still own games from their childhoods and beyond, like myself with my DS and PSP games, as well as my later collections with the 3DS, PS Vita and PS4. It's such a great feeling to know that you can just pick out an old game from your lineup and play it whenever you want. That one purchase you made years ago when you were a kid will last you forever. But that will not be the case going forward with scandalous and deceitful practices like this, and Nintendo are pushing for these to be the norm. This is all just a way for game companies to push consumers to an all-digital future. We know that's what they all want, but it deprives us, the consumer, of value and preserving our purchases. And as much as they know we don't want that, they are pushing us towards it whether we like it or not, and they are trying to do it slowly so we don't notice. Even though Ubisoft said it, ultimately, all game studios want us to get used to not owning our games. And the other downside is that because you bought the game via the keycard and there is no game data on it, it means all the game data will have to be installed onto your internal storage or microSD card. That is so freaking stupid. Another advantage of buying physical media is so that you don't have to waste more of your storage. But if you buy these keycards, you have no choice. You'll have to waste space by downloading the games onto your microSD card. And even though the game is downloaded onto your system, if you want to play Street Fighter 6 or another game that uses a keycard, you will still need to swap these empty cartridges out. Otherwise, your digital games will not play. Do you see how needlessly complicated this all is? And to make things worse, What happens if 10 plus years in the future Nintendo decides to shut down the Switch 2 eShop, just like they've done with previous systems? It means that these keycards will be useless because there is no game data on them. The more you break these keycards down, the more useless and dangerously anti-consumer they become. It has been 15 years and I can still play Super Street Fighter 4 on the 3DS with the physical purchase I made, and in another 15 years, that will not change. But will you be able to say the same thing for Street Fighter 6 on the Switch too? So essentially, these keycards are infinitely less useful than normal cartridges, have a much shorter lifespan, and if that wasn't enough, they cost you a lot more as well. There are no upside to these. But wait, it gets worse. Next up, we have Switch 2 editions. This has to be the biggest scam of them all. Now, what are Nintendo Switch 2 editions? Switch 2 editions are essentially remastered versions of games from the Switch 1. It's kind of like how we had The Last of Us and the Uncharted trilogy on PS3, and then they got remastered on the PS4. So that is what gamers expect when an old game releases for a new system. That if the re-released game has the name of the new system on the cover, then that is the brand new and remastered version. The prices for some of these old Nintendo Switch games that cost $70 at most have gone up to $80 on the Switch 2. Kirby and the Forgotten Land, The Legend of Zelda, Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, all these older games cost just as much as brand new games that are coming out today. Older game prices are supposed to go down over time, not up. And because it's Nintendo, once they set these new prices, they don't go down. There's literally no value here. They have literally found a way to make these old games full price again. In comparison, when I purchased The Last of Us Remastered on the PS4, the game cost me £29.86, and it came with noticeable enhancements to the graphics, all the DLC, and many of these PS4 games got free upgrades to 4K HDR when the PS4 Pro released. But whereas those games gave you free upgrades, Nintendo are charging you $10 to $20. So that makes these already old and overpriced games even more overpriced. I'd say it's sad to see Nintendo do this, but it was expected. As I've showcased in this video, the signs have all been there since the Switch 1. Nintendo have just moved the goalpost closer, and once GTA 6 releases for the much rumored $100, I'm gonna bet you that other studios are going to try to price their games at $80 to $100 as well, and it won't be long before those $100 prices become the new norm, until they start increasing those too, and that is very much representative of the Switch 2. Unjustifiable cost increases, scandalous business practices, and an additional cost everywhere you look. And by the way, a lot of this stuff wasn't even shown in the Nintendo Direct event, meaning that people had to piece all this information together for themselves as Nintendo didn't want to tell us. This speaks volumes of their confidence on the matter. Nintendo seemed to be under the impression that Mario Kart World and other $80 games are reaching ambitions that rival that of GTA 6, when in reality, countless other games on the PS4 from years ago had much higher production costs than these Nintendo games, and they were still able to sell at $60 and make substantial profits that justified them getting sequels made. So this $80 justification from Nintendo is just nonsense. The harsh reality, as is usually the case, is that making money is not enough for them. They want to make all the money in the world. That's what it comes down to, and it's what Bowser doesn't want to openly broadcast to the world. This whole launch is not so much a celebration of a sequel to a beloved console, as much as it is an experiment for greedy game companies to see how much gamers are willing to stretch their wallets. And if the Switch 2 proves successful, then you can bet that Sony and Microsoft will charge upwards of $700 for their next-gen systems. Now, I could talk about how Nintendo are charging you $10 for a pack-in game with Switch 2 Welcome Tour, or the fact that they have a C button that only functions if you pay a monthly subscription on top of the cost of the system and the games, but I think those are all redundant at this point. If Nintendo could, they would charge you just for breathing around the system. But if consumers are wise enough and smart enough to realize what Nintendo are doing, and are put off of the cost of the system, the games, and the business precedent this sets going forward, then Nintendo will have no choice but to go the way of the 3DS, where they dropped the price of the system and then had an uptick in sales. And that is ultimately what my hope is, that the system fails to sell the units Nintendo wanted, and that they give it a price cut. Because just like increasing costs will get other game studios to take note, being forced to cut costs will get them to take note too. Now, what do you think of the Nintendo Switch 2? Would you buy it? And what do you think of Nintendo's price strategy? If you enjoyed this video and like what I do, please consider supporting me on Patreon. It helps keep the channel going, and you will be rewarded with exclusive content in return. And if you're new to the channel, feel free to click that subscribe button and the bell right next to it so you can stay updated with all my future videos. Thank you very much for watching, everyone, and I will catch all of you very soon. Take care.